When we look at the, how are we going to start with it? When we look at the skeleton, we have the axial skeleton that we finished. Come on, turn around. Be cool. That's the midline portion. And we also have the rib cage be that axial skeleton, that axis of the body. But now we're going to the extremities. And so the turning point from axial to appendicular skeleton, or the separation, is the shoulder blade, the scapula on top for the upper extremity, and the clavicle, the collarbone here. Those are the two things that sort of anchor this upper body part into the trunk. So you want to visualize it like that. All right, because when we get to the muscles, then we're going to say, well, who's going to hold the arm to the trunk? And we got different muscles, and we're going to look at the muscles that attach to the shoulder blade, and they're going to anchor this into the trunk here. And then from there, we got the arm attachment into the shoulder blade, etc., etc. All right? So that's that point there, from axial to appendicular skeleton. Down here in the hip, it's the pelvis. So we have the sacrum, the end portion of the spine, that's still part of the axial skeleton, and then from there we move into the hip, and that pelvis, that's the appendicular skeleton. So that's where the legs start, and then they attach to it. It's very interesting because, you know, all that weight comes down and gets distributed to the hip, and then it goes to the legs and plants it into the ground. The upper extremities are very flexible. You can see that. If you actually construct a crane or something that's like this flexible and this strong, is like the best thing on the planet. It's very, very cool. Of course, that means it's going to wear out as well a little bit faster as we get older. So we want to be careful. So we have a lot of different motions we can do with the upper extremities, but that makes it a little bit more vulnerable that we use all these joints a little too much, and then they wear out a little bit. So that's the thing with the upper extremities. Very flexible, a little vulnerable. Very strong, though, for what it is. Lower extremity, you see how this is all much more massive, much more solid. And so that's more stability down here. Less motion. I can't do this down here. I could try, but it's really hard. So that's that flexibility decrease, but we get stability instead of that. Other than that, a lot of similarities to these two parts. So you can have, if you can visualize how the shoulder blade, the scapula, and the clavicle together are a little bit like this down here. It's just one bone down here, but it used to be more than one bone. But the skeleton got fused before we were born, and so we created one bone. So you find similarities, all right? So sometimes that's helpful if we have some similarities. When we look at, now specifically, where's my iPad? Here's my iPad. When we look at specifically the scapula, to start with here, right here, the shoulder blade, I'm going to start actually taking this one to look at it. I'm not using separate bones. I'm using these articulated skeletons because I find there is less questioning what's the direction of what and so forth. So I prefer those. And so that's what I want you to study on, and then that's what the test is like on high. So this is a right side, so you can sort of put it on the right side like that on your own body. So when you look at the shoulder blade first from the back, we can see we have a few parts to it. We have this ridge here in the middle sticking out, right here. And that ridge is known as the spine of the scapula. This is also a spine, we call this, so it's something pokey a little bit. A ridge, but a spine could also be a ridge. This is a ridge. But again, we recycle these terms a lot of the time. So familiarize with these terms as much as you can, and create your own list, or we actually are looking at prefixes and suffixes, so term lists for that. There's online stuff too, so look that up. So that's the landmark that we most prominently can see from the back. If we follow that to the end, we're actually going to the end of the shoulder. We're going right here, to the tip of the shoulder right here. That's right here. That's the acromion. The tip of the shoulder is the acromion. It's a bit flatter, and then, yeah, and see, I always have to reorient it. It's right here. And then there, what we attach to it is the clavicle, the collarbone. So then from here, the collarbone goes then to the front. And it pushes the shoulder blade back. It doesn't really do that much from a weight-bearing perspective. It doesn't hold us up. It's a very soft bone, a very brittle bone. Breaks a lot and easy. But it pushes the shoulder blade back. So it pushes that back so we don't walk around like that all the time. So that's kind of helpful. So we have that. Like in cats, this bone is inside the skin. It's called the dermal bone. The dermis is the skin. So it's a very, or in children, when they fall like with the arm stretched out, they fall down, they break this bone. It's a very easy bone to break. So it doesn't have weight bearing. It doesn't put the weight down into the ground. That's weight bearing. It's just sort of a postural bone. It holds us back. So that's the clavicle. So the collarbone is known as the clavicle. We don't have any landmarks of the clavicle. We just want to know the clavicle is the clavicle. I think, right? No, look at that. It's not even on the list. Well, you should know it anyway. So we have the spine of the scapula, the acromion process, then the clavicle. Now let's go back to the scapula in the back. Above the spine of the scapula, we have an indentation, a fossa. An indentation would be a fossa. We're going to have muscles sitting in there, in a fossa that goes out to here. And that's known as the supraspinous fossa. Supra means above. Spinous refers to the spine here, that bridge. And fossa is that indentation. So there's the word. So on the model, it's right here, that thing here. On yourself, if you grab over to the other side of the shoulder, you can touch it. That's what you're going to touch. So you feel this bone here. That's the spine of the scapula. You go above it. You feel that muscle. You can give yourself a massage. Probably feels good. That's the fossa, the supraspinous fossa, which is going to have a muscle sitting in there. That we're going to talk about next week.
That's your rotator cuff?
Yes. So if you bring it up, all the muscles, so the whole thing as a big picture, the shoulder blade anchors the upper extremities into the chest. So we're going to have muscles from the shoulder blade to the chest. But then yes, exactly, the muscles in the shoulder blade, they go to the humerus, and they hold the humerus into the shoulder blade. And those we call the rotator cuff muscles. And we'll have a whole 4 of them we talk about. All right? So that's very good. So you got that above place. And below the spine, you have a space called the infraspinous fossa. Supra, infra. Supra, superior, supra. Have that association. Inferior, infra. Have that association. All right? Fossa, again, muscle attachment. Cool stuff. Oh, well, I think it's cool stuff. I know I'm a little nerdy about this. And then, when we have a couple more terms, we look from the outside straight in, where this thing is like covering it, the humerus. This is the humerus. The arm bone here, the upper arm bone, that's the humerus. It's going to be our next bone. That's covering that joint surface where the humerus anchors in. But if you look here, I have a scapula from the side. And you see this little surface here. That's the glenoid cavity. That makes the joint with the humerus. So look at how flat and shallow that is. And then you compare it to the hip down here, and you see how big that thing is going to be here. So it's the same structure. But we're not walking on our hands, so we don't need all the weight bearing up here. We need mobility up here. Much more important. When we then look at the joint around this bone here, the glenoid cavity, is going to have structure that's like Tupperware kind of plastic, like firm but soft at the same time. And the arm sort of sits in there and it can move around. So sometimes it's called the labrum. Sometimes people have a labrum tear. So when they stretch out really hard, like football players or something, then they get smacked. It tears that thing, and it's a labrum tear.
It tears the
It tears not the glenoid cavity, not the bone, but the Tupperware plastic around it. So that's much more vulnerable to get broken. And it's actually very painful because cartilage, when you look at healing, you look at how much blood supply does something have. And the cartilage, where there's a lot of movement, you don't have much blood supply because you bleed all the time if you always move over it and rub over the blood supply, like blood vessel. You always bleed. And so structures like those are very hard to heal. Structures that don't have much blood going to them have a very hard time healing.
When you talk about, there's a photo of an abnormal AC joint.
Oh, where's that?
On page 48.
Yeah, I don't know.
That one.
That one?
What does AC stand for?
Oh, acromioclavicular. So it's this joint. From where we just talked about, from here to here. The collarbone to the clav. So if you go on football play and you tackle somebody and you get smacked on the side and the shoulder, the arm goes down and the clavicle springs up, that's an AC separation, where the clavicle and the shoulder blades separate from one another. And that's a problem, because then your clavicle can't push that shoulder blade back. So all of a sudden, that shoulder blade moves forward, and it rounds forward. If you go on YouTube, you see there's some videos with people that don't have a clavicle, they can bring their shoulders together in the front. It's really creepy looking. It's like weird stuff. So, when you look at this stuff, you want to also think of what would it do, the function, why is it there? All right. So that's pretty much these structures here. We have the glenoid cavity, and then the other one I want to do is make sure the subscapular fossa. So if you turn it around and you go to the front towards the ribs, that part in there is the subscapular fossa. It's another rib muscle attachment. This is a very important muscle attachment. A lot of people have pain because the muscle down in here creates pain in the upper ear. And so it's interesting for me, from a clinical perspective, to know that one. It's one of those people don't often necessarily touch because it's a weird place to find. And then the other thing we have in the front there is this hook. Right here in the front is a hook. So if you show, your spine goes out, your acromion is here, your clavicle comes to the front, but next to it there's this hook in the front. Do you see that? It's called the coracoid process. And I'm always thinking what the heck is a hook like that going to do? It's going to be a muscle attachment. That's your first thinking. Something like that sticking out, it's going to be a muscle. It's not going to make a joint. It looks too crooked for that. And I always remember that term coracoid process because it's like the raven on top of the waist says coracoid, coracoid, and it's sticking up like that, kind of weird. So that's how sometimes you just got to come up with weird stuff. That stuff sticks the best in the head, I tell you. And that was one of those for me. It's like, whatever, but it worked. And so that's the coracoid process. And then from there, we go into the humerus. So we go to the upper arm bone. And again, if you have questions, just interrupt me. Make sure just interrupt me. Don't hesitate. Okay? So make as much back and forth as we can with that, so you understand what we're talking about. So once we leave the shoulder blade, the scapula, that's probably the hardest bone we're going to do besides the hip today. Then we go into the humerus. That's the upper arm bone. And then we got a few structures. But look at that thing. You got this round thing on top. If something's round, it's on an end of a bone, is most likely going to be called what? The head of something. So that's going to be called the head of the humerus. And then on the humerus, we have is a little interesting. You have this head of the humerus, that's the structure on top, and then It's fairly shallow, and it stops, and then there's this line here where it stops, the head stops. They call that the anatomical neck. And they call that the anatomical neck because it's wide, it's firm, it's strong, but it's the end of the head. But then we have these bumps that we're going to talk about. And after the bumps, we have this narrow part. And that part is called the surgical neck. And that's when a humerus breaks up here, it breaks here, where the surgical neck is. You know, you assume where it's narrow, it might break, right? It's the more vulnerable. You know, it's like a twig gets a little narrower, so it probably may break if it has to break. So if it has to break, it's not going to break here in the anatomical neck. When we anatomy, we think, hey, the head, the neck, you know, the anatomy, theoretical. It's going to break where it's surgical neck, where it's narrow and vulnerable. So that's that two terms there. And then the other thing we are interested in this part here is we got a couple of bumps. And so we have a big bump and we have a small bump. And we have the big bump. The big bump is right here, sort of on the outside part a little bit. And then the smaller bump is next to it, more medial, more the inside of it. So in here, you just have a big bump and a small bump. And in between the two bumps, you got a little shallow depression there. And so these bumps are known as the tubercle. The greater tubercle is the bigger, and greater is bigger. And then the lesser tubercle is the smaller. Tubercle is sort of it's a muscle attachment. It's a projection for muscle attachment. So you're going to have the muscles that that we talked about that come, the rotator cuffs from the shoulder blade, they're going to attach to here. So they're just going to grab that arm in to the shoulder blade. So they're very short from that perspective. They move the arm, but they really mostly hold it in to support and firm it. All right, so we got three muscles going to have, we talked about it, we got some on the back, they go to the bigger bump, and then we got one from the front, they go to the smaller bump. And that's how they can kind of, from the front and the back, hold it in like that.
So the tubercles are a muscle attachment?
They what?
The tubercles are where the muscles attach?
Mm-hmm. Tubercles is muscle attachment. And specifically on those up here, it's going to be those rotator cuff muscles that hold the arm into the shoulder blade to make sure the arm doesn't fall out. Up here, everything is held together more or less by muscles. All right, so it's a lot of that stuff. So it's kind of cool. I think it's really cool. Then you have between the bumps, you have this groove. And if this is the famous muscle, right? This one I have so much of, like, see? I'm so strong. That biceps brachii, that front muscle that people always are like showing off, that goes right through this groove in here. So it goes from up here, goes down, and then the big belly comes here down here. It's actually not that big, but people think it's that big. We'll talk about that next week. We don't have that term on the list, but that's just to give you a perspective. Okay, a little bit. So these two bumps, so we have the head, we have a couple of necks, we got bumps, and then we got a shaft. And the long part is actually not even on the list. Huh? That's all right. The long part of a bone, like a long bone, like this kind of a long bone, is always called a shaft. But the landmark here we want to know is on the side. If you actually feel on the side a little, it's a little roughage. There's a little roughage on the plastic model. Here on the side. On yourself, you feel the roughage. It's right here in the middle. You feel that roughage. That's known as the deltoid tuberosity. So the muscle here attaches here, goes down to the arm, is attaching in there. So the deltoid tuberosity. Tubercle, tuberosity, muscle attachments. Bumps. They're bumps. Well, it's not really that big of a bump, but still, it's sort of a bump.
I notice on the next one, it's just the posterior view of the humerus. It says radial groove. I think it's on the next.
Oh, it's at the top. at the top, here's that one.
Oh yeah, I'm not worried about that.
Is that, but is that an actual thing on the humerus?
Yeah, it's a line here. It's a little indentation. But again, that's where we're separating them out. So I mostly have you study muscle attachments compared to those kind
I
of
just
things.
got confused because the bottom part's called the radius.
Oh, yeah. It's, I know.
But this is, yeah.
That's just another muscle attachment to another landmark, the radial groove. But the groove is more of an indentation where we have a vessel going past it, most likely, for example. So when we go distally to the bottom portion, the elbow, we have a couple more terms that I want you to be paying attention to. And you can feel it on yourself. You go down and you have this bump here. Sometimes you hit it, it hurts, right? The bone is right by the skin. It's right here, that thing sticking out. That's called the medial epicondyle. Medial epicondyle.
Is that like the funny bone?
Yeah.
Yes. The nerve goes right there. Very good connection. Right here, in that groove there. Medial epicondyle. See the word condyle? We were talking about condyle makes a joint. When you see the word epi, EPI, means something above. So technically, they changed the terms. Of course, they have to give us, make it confusing. But technically, these things in the old days, and in the knees down here, they call them condyles. They make the elbow joint. But the thing that's right next to it, a little above it, they call it the epi something. And here it's called an epicondyle. It's right next to making a joint. These are muscle attachments. Very, very important muscle attachments. Every muscle that does this motion with your wrist is going to be pretty much attached right here in that medial epicondyle area. Maybe not right at it, but close to it. So all these muscles here in the front, they help you close your hand, close your wrist, and a lot of them start right here by the medial epicondyle. And then the other one on the outside is not that prominent. It's known as the lateral epicondyle. So see, that's where medial and lateral comes back in. That's why we make you memorize those. And then if you turn the elbow around in the back, well, actually, if you touch your elbow here, if you touch this elbow here, you're actually not touching the humerus. You're touching the forearm bone. You're touching this bone here. So that bone is known as the ulna, and that bone sort of hooks in the humerus. So it's kind of cool. That's why you can straighten it out, but you can't go further than straight. Once you don't want to break it, right? It will break this piece off here. And so you need an indentation where that hook can go in, and that indentation is known as the olecranon fossa. Again, an indentation is a fossa. Here, it receives the bone. That's sort of unique. Very often, it's a muscle attachment. And then from there, we go to, again, you slow me down if I'm too fast, or if I'm too slow, you speed me up. See here, see that hook? That's that hook. Right here, that hook. There's a big picture, just that hook here. So you can see how that hooks into, that here hooks into that upper portion, that humerus part here. All right, so that's that olecranon process. Well, it's an olecranon fossa. This is another terminology question, right? It's an olecranon fossa on the humerus side, but it's an olecranon process on the forearm bone side. And the forearm bone here is this one, which is the ulna. And it's big on top, and then it gets skinny and narrow at the bottom. And if you follow it down to the bottom, it goes to the pinky side. So if you have, this is where it's good to have these articulated skeletons here. Because if you look at the right arm here we go, the right arm, that elbow bone here, the ulna that has that hook here, the olecranon process, goes parallel down towards the pinky finger. And that's the ulna. So let's see what else we got on that ulna. Oh, and then at the bottom, you see at the bottom here, there's a little little tip. A little tip. That little tip is known as the styloid process. And then a bone right next to it is known as the radius, the radial bone. And the radius goes to the thumb, always goes to the thumb side. So if you look at the wrist, the radius is on the thumb side. On the top, it's small. On the bottom, it's really big. So it's the opposite than the ulna.
So could you say that the ulna is posterior to
The radius? No, it's actually, this is a good
or
question.
lateral to the radius?
Yes, so, and that's not actually even true either, because now you're going to go motion into that thing. So if you're standing in an anatomical position, the palm goes forward. The reason why you have an anatomical position is that then the radius and the ulna are parallel. So at that point, yeah, the radius is lateral to the ulna. But if I go palm down, I'm going to make a cross and cross over them. So that's that pronation, that palm down, palm up motion, pronation, supination.
Okay.
That's that motion there. So you have to them parallel or they cross over. So that's an interesting motion.
When it's in
It's
the
very complicated.
anatomical position, the ulna is lateral,
Medium.
medial to the radius.
Yeah. Radius thumb. That's my big remembering thing. Radius thumb. And when you look at the radius, I got a couple more pieces because on top, by the elbow, the radius is all round. It's really cool. This round thing, that's called a head. Of course it's called a head. Why do we call it anything else, right? And that round thing is the thing that rotates when we go palm down. It turns up there, so it just rotates around it. It's kind of cool that way. And then what else we got on the radius? I think about the radial tuberosity. When you look at the radius, you got a bump here, a fairly big bump. That's actually the bump for the muscle to attach to that goes to that groove up here. That big thing I have so much of. Or not so much. So that goes right into here. So that's known as a radial tuberosity. So that's a cool bump. So I want to know the cool bumps. And then what else we got there? The neck of the radius, of course, that's between the head and the bump. And then at the bottom, we have a radial styloid process of the radius. And the reason why I put those up is because when you look at them here, and then you look at the wrist, you see how the styloid of the ulna and the side of the radius, they kind of make a shallow depression like that then the wrist can sit in. And the wrist has two bones, two rows of bones. And we're not studying all those wrist bones. They're too complicated. I mean, they're not complicated. It's just a lot of them. We don't need to memorize all that stuff for the sake of memorizing. So they're right here. What we want to know, though, there's two rows. One sits sort of on the forearm side here, and then the other one goes to the finger side, or the web of the palm side, actually, first. And so that makes us do these kind of motions, sideways, frontways, turning around a little. So all these little joints help with those motions. And then from there, you get into the web of the hand. So this here is the web of the hand, not the fingers. And that's where we have the metacarpals. So you can feel that. You can feel these bony things here in the web. In between, you have a lot of muscle.
Are the numbers you put on there standard?
Yeah, first the
Thumb is
thumb,
always 1.
pinky 5. Yes. And then from there, we have a phalanges, and those are the fingers. And what you've noticed, even though the thumb is a big puppy, it only has one joint. You can only do that. So it only has two balls that do one joint. All the other ones, you can do that with them. Not as strong, maybe, but you have more connections. You have more joints you can make, you can bend. And so we're going to have on all the fingers, except the thumb, we have 3 bones in the phalanges, and we call them proximal. Proximal means closer to the attachment, closer to the shoulder, so to speak. This is closer to the arm. Middle and distal. Distal is further away from the attachment of the extremity. The foot's going to look very similar. The toey stuff. It's just a little smaller, but very similar. Yes, go ahead. Got it? From there, I want to go to the pelvis. What's my timing? Am I all out of line here? No, we're doing all right. A little bit more time, and then this is a large thing to go through these terms. But then I want to take out the hip. And what you have on your table is you have the spine with the pelvis, like this. And then you got the one where you just have one side where there's no sacrum with it. Okay? It gets a little harder to understand how the orientation is. Like that. So what you have is you have a right side. Wait, is that right? Yeah, right. No, a left side. Yeah, you have a left side. Oh, you have a right arm, left side. And then, the muscles are usually the opposite, so they make sure it confuses us. But anyway, we'll do that another time. So when we look at that hip from the front, you see these two sides right here. These are these things. When you have a baby and you have a baby sitting on your hip, you've got a baby sitting on this bone here, sitting up on here, and we call that the iliac crest. Oh, look, that should be dark. See here, iliac crest. If we follow the iliac crest on this model to the front, we get to a pointy place, and that's known as the anterior superior iliac spine, or ASIS. Or if you go to IKEA, it's the as-is section. Just, I guess that's so like last millennium, huh, the IKEA stuff. I'm so old. Here it is. ASIS. If you follow the crest to the back, you get to a big bump right in here. Then you can talk on yourself too. It's this big bump back in here, and that's known as the posterior superior iliac spine. Posterior because it's in the back. Superior because it's fairly high on the hip. There's one below, further down. Iliac because this bone here is called the ilium. So when I look at the hip, the pelvis, I actually have three bones that make out the pelvis. They're all fused, so they're one bone the way we see them, but they started out as three different bones. And one is that big piece here, the ilium, that I can put my kid on top. Then I have the sit bone in the back. This one here, that's a separate bone. That's known as the ischium. Here, ischium. And then in the front, where the pubic bone is, that's the pubic bone. The right one is the pubic bone, where that comes together in the front. Every term, every landmark around the ischium is called, ilium is going to be called iliac or something. Every term around the sit bone area in the back is going to be having the term ischium, ischial in it. The one that we point there out, that's the big one that's most important, is the ischial tuberosity. That's the sit bone. That's the one we should sit on when we sit. And then the front, everything in the front related is known as pubis. And a big one there is the pubic symphysis. Here, the pubic symphysis, the joint in the front where it comes together right here.
So, so this view, this is the right posterior?
Yes, the right side. Front, back. Like me. This is this way. Or like here, on the skeleton. It's this direction, this one. It's this one on the right side. So it's this view.
So this is almost more like a side view.
It is a side view.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is a side view. With the back here, the front there, and then the other term we haven't talked yet is the acetabulum. That's here. And that's where the femur goes in. That's the socket where the bone goes in here, and then the leg bone comes out of it and moves down. I know. That pelvis, that Elvis with that pelvis. Complicated. But you start getting an idea about it a little bit. See if you can actually kind of visualize in some ways and say like, well, this part is like the shoulder blade and then this part is like the clavicle. You know, and like evolutionarily speaking. How we were made from four-legged to two-legged. You know, have you ever asked the question, how do we work from being four-legged to two-legged? And one of the things embryologically, what happens is that the extremities rotate. And so they rotate a little different here than here as we get born. That's why we walk around a little different than a rat. But fundamentally, it's the same construction. Question?
How does that line up to that?
That. Right there. So that's the left one.
Okay.
I know, this is one of those things. They haven't figured out that some of us, I'm very dyslexic. Right? So this is the right side. This is the left model.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
And we have to just be mindful because when we look at the legs later, we have to be very clear. It's like the arm is the opposite side than the. I don't know why they did that. It just, I don't know.
It's like you should get issued a skeleton book.
Huh?
It's like-
Oh, absolutely, you should. Totally. Preferably real book. No. No, I'm totally. I mean, this stuff is complex. That's why we're sort of skinning the surface, and I want to be focused on the terms, but I also want to give you some understanding of how it works. Because at the end of the day, who gives a crap about the terms? I mean, it's important, but it's really important how to understand, and it helps you understand the terms better. You know, that's the other thing. So when we get to the femur, that's the humerus of the leg. We got similar structures again. We got a round thing on top. If I find it. What would you call the round thing on top? A head. Then we got an arrow thing coming after the head. What do we call that? Here we just have one of them. It's a neck. Head, neck. Great. Here we just have one neck. Then we got a couple of bumps. These are big bumps. This is a big bump here. So that bump on the outside. Now the bump is mostly on the outside, and then we got a small one on the inside. Instead of tubercle, these are big ones. We call them trochanter. So we have a, where's the picture of that thing? Well, I guess, here we go. We got a greater trochanter on the outside, the big bump, and then we got a lesser trochanter on the inside here. That should point to this. I'm not so sure what happened in this picture. It's like tubercles, like in the humerus, similar structure. Then we go down. Here we don't have a deltoid tuberosity, but we do have in the back. If you look at the back of the femur, it's like a ridge. It's sharpy a little bit. It's muscle attachment. You have the linea aspera, it's called. Here, look, the right here. Linea aspera, and you got all the muscles that they attach here, the muscles that go from here to the inside. So all of these muscles, they're all attached back in here, and they bring the leg close to the midline. So they're massive. Just think about having to balance out this way. These muscles need to be working really hard. They're all attached here. The other muscle, the biggest muscle in the body that we have is the quad. And most of the, two of the four quads are attached here and reach around and go into the knee. That's how big they are. So this is a very, very big muscle place for muscle attachment. Linea aspera. Of course, and I like the name, right? That's why I put it up. Huh?
The linea aspera is on the posterior side?
Yeah, it's in the back side, posterior. Mm-hmm. Cool stuff. And then as you get to the... Oh, look, I put them all here. These are the muscles here that go to the midline. And then here we have some of the quads that I just put up so you can memorize it. You know, then you have a visual. And then if you go to the bottom part, the knee end of things, you got condyles now. Now we finally get back to this word condyle. You got these big things here. You got one on the inside, one on the outside. You got a lateral condyle, and you got a medial condyle. These big things. And the knee is interesting. The knee, you would think it's like it closes like that. The knee bends like that, like a hinge. It doesn't. It actually rolls. So these things roll on the knee. That's why you don't want to bend forward and have the knee too far forward, because they roll off the knee. And it's really a lot of pressure for the knee. That's why they say when you do exercise, sometimes in the gym or so, they say don't put your knee too much in front of the foot when you do exercise. And that's the reason for that.
So the medial is the inside?
Yes. Medial is always inside, lateral is always outside. So that's what we have there. And then there, I think the other thing I've seen is the patellar surface. And so if I turn it back around, yeah, see here, this is a picture that you can see how the knee, it turns. The femur sort of turns on that knee joint. I mean, this is pretty advanced, but I want to just give you the idea of why is it looking like that. So it rotates. And then on the front, you got the kneecap. Oh, you notice you got a kneecap. And the kneecap is a sesamoid bone. And it's really interesting. Sesamoid bones are really interesting. They're bones that grow inside tendons. And tendons are the ends of muscles. So this bone goes inside this quad muscle right before it goes into the knee to help the knee get the quad get more rounding instead of just going up and then go straight down. Because if there's a right angle right here, you would have to contract this a lot, create all this tension here, and all of a sudden, it will jump up. That's not going to be good. But because we have this patella, this bone, we make a rounding of the muscle. We can transfer the force evenly through that rounding, and the knee can come up and straighten out the leg nicely and even. So these bones, this patella bone, is to help the knee straighten nicely. So it's a bone inside a tendon. It's under sesamoid bone at the end, I think. Oh,
You say tendons are muscle-to-muscle attachment or bone to bone?
oh, ligaments are bone to bone.
Okay.
Tendons are muscle into bone. Very good. A tendon is a muscle into a bone. So it's, when you look at muscles, it's the white stuff that anchors a muscle into the bone. That's the tendon. Like here, this muscle comes down, that's where it goes into the bone, that's the tendon. That's the muscle, that's the tendon. It's usually white turf. All right, so that's the patellar surface, and then from there, we go to the leg, passing the knee. So we have two bones in the leg. We got a big bone and a small bone. One on the inside, the big one, this is the right side, left leg. A big one on the inside is known as the tibia. And then we got one on the out, and again, this is different and that's the opposite, right? You see that? Then one on the outside is a small skinny bone that's known as the fibula. The weight, the force goes from the femur down through the tibia. Look at that. Another condyle. So you got the condyle on the femur, but you also have the same term on the tibia, where the bone of the femur comes in. So it comes down to here like that. Like that. Make sense? So we can recycle those terms. That's a good thing. So we don't have. So we have a lateral and a medial. Lateral is always outside. Then in the front, we have a bump on the knee. And that bump on the knee is where all those quad muscles, all those big ones, go and anchor into. And that's known as the tibial tuberosity. Tibial tuberosity. Be aware, don't confuse that on a test with the bone with the patella. Be aware, that bump is the tibial tuberosity. This is clinically important with boys a lot of times when the quads go faster than the bone, and they get irritation here because they do so much sport. They run around too much. So that's tibial tendonitis. We can talk about that when we get to the quads a little more. It's kind of interesting stuff. And then as we go down the tibia, so we got these two. What else do I need on the tibia? When we go down further, we just go down to the bottom. And in the bottom, instead of a stylus process, like we had these little things here, they're pretty big here. We got a malleolus. We got this bump. And if you ever hit that bump and go like on a bike or something, go like, damn, that hurt. That's the medial malleolus, that bump, if you ever hit that thing. So you know what it's called. But you got the bone right underneath the skin. That's why it's like exposed. And then on the outside, you got the fibula. The fibula, I'm really mostly concerned about you recognizing that bone, but the bottom has also malleolus. It's known as the lateral malleolus, the outside bump. And so those two bumps, they kind of cradle the ankle. And they hold it so the ankle just doesn't wobble back and forth. I mean, who has twisted ankles? Probably most of us, right? Have twisted some ankles? It's already wobbly enough. Mostly this way when we wobble, because these ligaments are not as strong. This is very strong in the middle, so we don't usually get the twisted ankle to the outside. It's usually to the inside because of that. Don't worry, though. That's maybe this is where you see the force coming down the tibia and then into the ankle. What I was talking about, the outside here is more vulnerable when we twist the ankle than the inside. It's kind of we kind of intuitively think that way, I think, mostly. And then when we look at the ankle bones, let me look from the side. Oh, here it is, the side picture here. We got the main one where all the force comes down from the tibia into the ankle. It's a cube-shaped bone, and from there it brings the force to the back and to the front. And we have an arch here, and sort of we bounce on that thing. Like that's how we can walk, you know, that is a springy thing to it. Some of us have a little less of an arch than others, but you know, we have an arch this way. And so the bone, the cube-shaped bone, that all the force comes down is called the talus. It's that here, right here. So that bone is right there. And then the heel bone in the back, it's the other one I want you to know, is called the calcaneus. Calcaneus is where the force moves towards the back. And then the ones in the front, we'll do those next semester or another time. They're basically there to create. In the foot, they're actually more, in some ways, very interesting because they have to, all these bones have to create an arch that we can bounce, this way bounce, but then also down in here, in the front of the foot, we also have an arch this way, so we can bounce this way a little bit. So it's kind of an interesting structure, biomechanically speaking. So we'll talk